This video is sponsored by Deep Cut Studios. For a wide range of fantastic gaming resources such as battle mats, dice trays and pre-painted bases, check out the description below. Hi guys, welcome back to TNG Productions. My name is Tom and we're back with another contrast painting tutorial, and today we're going to be looking at the Daughters of Khaine and specifically Morgwaeth's Blade-coven, which is like the Underworld warband version. And if you've not encountered these tutorials before, this is for people like me who aren't particularly the best at painting in the hobby, who want a quick and easily replicatable result using the Citadel Contrast range and a little bit of dry brushing and nothing really more, just to get a nice tabletop standard as it's known. So for Morgwaeth here, we're going to start with a WRAITHBONE spray undercoat. Now realistically you could use any that you want that's light here. You could use a white, or you could even use the grey sear, but as a general rule of thumb I like to use WRAITHBONE for living models and then the grey sear for kind of automatons or constructs or undead and things like that, and that's a general good rule of thumb. But if you want to use white, that's absolutely fine. You just want a light colour for the contrast to shine through. Now speaking of shining, we're actually going to start with a metallic. We're going to be using RETRIBUTOR armour, and this is because the Daughters of Khaine often have a lot of beautifully instrumental and gorgeous headdresses that they use, as well as all the bladey parts that tend to have pommels and ornamentations that can be on their bodices and on their weapon hafts. So we're going to be doing those in a gold colour. Now RETRIBUTOR armour is fantastic because it is a base paint, meaning it goes on really well, good coverage, and it smoothens out. Now it's worth saying for this tutorial, for the majority of this I'm going to be using an Army Painter Regiment brush and a Kalinsky Sable, which is the free one that you get with the Army Painter big box, but the equivalent is essentially a character brush. So that's going to be for the intricate bits, and then obviously the regiment is for all the bigger areas. Now we're going to go on to GUILLIMAN Flesh, because with contrast it's always good to start with the lighter colours and work your way darker. The reason we started with the gold is because the GUILLIMAN Flesh is not just going to go on the areas with skin, it's also going to go over those gold areas as a wash. Now with contrast paints, in general it is good to apply them as you would a normal wash, i.e. not that thick coat that Games Workshop always try to sell you on. Just try and get it into the nooks and crannies and the details, but don't let it pull too heavily and don't slop it on. In general, I would also say avoid doing two coats because it never seems to work out fantastically well. The only caveat I will say is once this has dried a little bit later, I go back and I just put very thin lines of GUILLIMAN Flesh in areas of the musculature in terms of where I want to accentuate that. And I was just trying to push myself to do something a little bit new for this tutorial. But in general, all you want to do is to apply a nice, smooth, even finish, as you can see in the image here. And you know, she's already started to take some life with this kind of pale flesh tone. Now obviously if you wanted her a little bit darker, you could use any of the other flesh tones that are available, such as Fire Slayer and Dark Oath, I think it's called. Anyway, we're going to go back to our metallics now, because unfortunately there's just not a great contrast metallic. I mean, you could use Basilicanum Grey for this silver area. I'm using Leadbelcher just to keep up that consistency with the gold that I've used. And this is going to go on any of the other areas that require metallic. So you can see she's got her blade here of her snap scepter. It literally came in the box snapped. I was a little bit heartbroken here because it's supposed to be a little bit longer. But, you know, it still looks like a mighty weapon that she can do some damage with. These guys have got shin guards. They've got knee pads. They've got spikes coming out of everywhere, basically being the super aggressive warband that they are. So any of the areas that you want to be a silver metallic as opposed to the gold, you should pick out now, and that is because this is also going to receive a wash a little bit later. So we're just trying to make sure we're as neat as possible, not going over that flesh tone. But what I did in between each of these steps is anywhere that was particularly messy, I just went back with my WRAITHBONE from the pot and just neatened up a little bit. You can see a little bit of flesh on the weapon blade there. I'll tidy that up a little bit later, just trying to make sure that the areas that I'm painting onto have got that nice pure base coat so the contrast can do their job, where they stretch and contrast, you know, and let a little bit of that undercoat come through. So we're going on to Black Templar next, and that's going to be for the weapon half. Some of the other models in this warband have a variety of areas that can benefit, such as they tend to wear stockings underneath their shin guards, also kind of behind their boots. All manner of areas that can benefit from this. You could use wildwood if you would prefer to have a more wooden or dark brown look. I'm just going with Black Templar because it's got very nice coverage again, and it tends to be a relatively forgiving paint. Now what I mean by that is you have to be very neat, but if it kind of doesn't go on as smoothly as you want it to, as you'll see in a second, it can also benefit from the wash that we're going to use on the silver, meaning that it'll darken it down a little bit, whereas if you're really happy with the way it looks, you don't have to put the wash on. So it's a nice kind of part. The only awkward part of this model here is this knee pad, because it's got flesh, gold, silver and black all very close together, so it's just making sure I was really kind of careful with it. And you can see at this stage, while I was waiting for it to dry, I've put a little bit of the GUILLIMAN Flesh on like the inside of her thigh, and you can see just on her right arm there, just in the creases. So anyway, speaking of that wash, we're going to go on to NULN oil now. Now, NULN oil is going to go all over the black and silver areas to try and darken them down a little bit. And essentially what this will allow you to do is to have a little bit more depth in those areas, and it'll allow us to dry brush it a little bit later. Now, like I said, I've deliberately tried to keep this as minimal on paints as possible because I don't want you buying 20 different types of paints. It's not necessary. That being said, if you did choose to use the Wildwood, obviously you could use Agrax Earthshade to darken that down. And if you use Basilicanum Grey on the metallics, you probably wouldn't need to put NULN oil on it because it already has that kind of wash-like quality where it sinks into the recesses. But because I've kept up with the metallics here, I've chosen to use NULN oil, which is a really, really nice thin coat that I'm using. Same with the Guilliman Flesh when I was going over the gold areas. You don't want to be too heavy on this. You just want to add a little bit of depth to those colours. And you can see already she's coming along really, really well. And the main process here is just taking your time and being neat. So we're going to go back to our Leadbelcher now, and this is going to be a dry brush. Now, essentially, I'm going to use a small dry brush here. I'm going to try and get the majority of the paint off the brush. Now, if you're a little bit underconfident with dry brushing, can I recommend using like a cheap makeup brush, you know, one of the rounded edge ones? They tend to be a lot more forgiving and allowed you to kind of avoid any kind of powdered finish. But essentially, I'm just going to go over my Leadbelcher. Always less is more. I can build it up later if I'm not particularly happy. This is going on the silver and the golden areas, and that is because those headdresses that have a pronounced kind of curvature to them and the knee pads and the areas around her benefit from having a little bit of that silver edging. And for the black, I'm going to be using Dawnstone, and this is going to be just to pick up the highlights here. Now for Morgwaeth, I don't know what her name is. She doesn't really need a lot on this because there aren't any really prominent black areas outside of her boots. But some of the other members are in different positions. You might want to pick out their leggings, and there are other models within the Daughters of Khaine range that have larger black areas that you can use just to pick up the areas of their boots. And as we said, like stockings and weapon shafts and things like that, just to add a little bit of difference to it. But you could completely skip this step if you've been really happy with the way that that black has gone out. Now, annoyingly, when I was recording, I lost this clip, so this is me just showing you that I've used Flesh Tearers Red for all of the red areas, and this is where I had to be very careful and very neat and to make sure that I'd gone over with WRAITHBONE to get a nice smooth finish. You could use Blood Angels Red if anyone's watched my Skaven painting tutorial. I don't like Blood Angels Red, I much prefer Flesh Tearers because of the depth of colour it gives. If it goes over a light base coat, you get a really nice highlight, and that's really easy to build upon with Evil Sunz Scarlet. So again, this is an optional step if you want to add a little bit more brightness to these red areas. Small dry brush again, and just very carefully, especially on the bodice, picking out the highest areas, going against the grain. And like I said, less is more. Be very careful, build it up bit by bit. You just want to get the raised areas of the cloth. It gives this kind of like orangey tone, which just adds again a little bit of depth that hopefully you can see just at the bottom building up there. But I love Flesh Tearers Red. It's by far and away my favourite red for contrast. I think after this I might even do a Blood Angels tutorial where I show you how you can use that for their armour. But you can see this Evil Sunz has just picked up those lightest areas in the creases and on the bodice. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back onto the detail of her bodice and just add the gold back in because she has got a little bit of finery, and just using the same method that we did before. Anyway, these guys have lots of jewels that are abounding on their headdresses, knee pads, and weapons. I'm going to be using AKHELIAN green, which is this beautiful, deep, jadey kind of green colour. I'm just going to pick out any of the areas that I wanted. Now, you'll notice I've base coated them with metallics, and that is because hopefully a little bit of that silver and gold will shine through. But what you can do, which is what I chose to do, if you've applied it thickly and it's a little bit too green, you can give it a little dry brush with Leadbelcher for the silveriness, just to blend it back in with that armour. But you can see already she's got such a nice variety of colours on her. Now we're going to go on to the hair. Now I did do a test model for this to see how it would go. I strongly recommend whichever colour you pick, whether it's the Athematic blue for that kind of light blue colour, or Magos purple, or even the Volupus pink, whichever one you want to use, I strongly recommend you do a 1-to-1 mix with contrast medium. So I just do dollops using my brush, like 3 dollops of the medium, then 3 dollops of the colour that I want. And that's because you want that kind of bubblegummy faint colour, and that's exactly what we want with the hair, because we're going to dry brush this as well, but it just means it doesn't go on too strong. My test model, I just used the Magos purple, and it was a little bit too strong, so I definitely learnt my lesson. And you can see here, you get this beautiful kind of faint white coming through from the undercoat, but the contrast is still adding that pinkish tinting. And like I said, you could use Athematic blue if you prefer that. Whichever one you choose to use, I would use ULTHUAN grey as a highlight. Now you'll notice there's a little bit of red that's still left on my dry brush here, which is coming through. I would recommend you strongly wash your brushes, but because I'm doing a hair pink, a little bit of red isn't the end of the world, and essentially you just want to get most of the paint off the brush again and go against the grain, just picking out the highest areas of the ruffles in her hair, the braids, any bits and pieces like that. Just trying to avoid any of the other areas that you've done. You can see him catch the weapon half there and just try and make sure I wipe it off, and avoid going on too thickly with it because it will leave a powdery finish. And again, if you struggle with that, a makeup brush is a fantastic way of getting around it. They just tend to be a little bit harder to get in the nooks and crannies, but if you get a cheap like £5, $5 set from Amazon, you've probably got a good variety. Now, in case you want to replicate my basing, this was nice and simple. It was Eshin Grey with a NULN oil wash and then a dry brush of Bane Blade Brown. Ooh, that was hard. And then I used, I think, some Wildwood and Screaming Skull just for the skull and the roots. And you can see I can't get through a model without adding Blood for the Blood God everywhere, so I've just put a little bit on the base and obviously that cup that's overflowing and her blade. And this is our finished miniature, all done. I'd say grand total painting time, you may be looking at about an hour to an hour and a half, just allowing things to dry. But I'm really happy with how she's came out. She's got a really nice even finish. Now, if you want to ask any questions or you want any extra support with this, please do let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see other models in the future, let me know what you'd like to see me paint, and I can definitely get on that. But I hope this has been helpful, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Hi guys, thank you very much for watching our content. It means the world to us. If you'd like to see some more videos, they should be over here. And if you'd like to support our channel, keep these lights on. You can find links to our Patreon and merchandise in the description below. See you later.